As we come to the conclusion of the first week at COP27, young people, but also so many others have been here advocating for change, lobbying for different things, as well as in the negotiations, making decisions on what are the different topics on how we're going to combat climate change. There has been quite a lot of focus this time specifically with the different pavilions, with so many civil society present in the blue zone. There's been conversations on restoration, there's been conversations on adaptation. Even within the negotiations, we have seen how loss and damage has finally had a role in the agenda, and now negotiations are underway on what finance for loss and damage is going to look like. So, as we come to the end of this week and move into the last and the final week of COP27, we wanted to touch base and understand what we can do and what are the demands from this community here to take into the next week. This session would absolutely not have been possible without our wonderful partners, the Robert Bosch Stiftung, the Youth and Landscapes Initiative, and the GLFX chapters in Mindanao, Porto Novo, Baku, Yaoundé, Kalimantan, which aim at highlighting the incredible work of local actors and young experts from different parts of the world, and at exploring their challenges, needs, and call to action for all of those who in the next week will be joining us at COP27. So let's dive right into it. Let me now invite all our speakers. First of all, we will be hearing from Camille Riviera, who is the GLFX Mindanao chapter coordinator and co-founder of Oceanas, a local NGO in the Philippines that aims at restoring wetlands. Camille, a very warm welcome to the stage. Can you please share with us a little bit more about your work, what you're doing to respond to the climate crisis, especially in relation to the food systems?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Hita. As a GLFX Mindanao chapter, we started with conducting community training to increase mangrove nursery seedlings as another source of livelihood. We also ensure there is enough understanding with the local knowledge of mangroves, their practices, and their attitude towards these ecosystems, especially in the provision of fisheries and storm protection, as our country is very vulnerable to typhoons. What we are hoping to achieve as a chapter is that we reforest and expand mangrove restoration in degraded areas so that these members will have something to earn during the typhoon season when they cannot go out fishing and become more sustainable in the future.
Thank you so much, Camille. And now we move to another part of the world. We come closer to Africa, especially in Ghana. We have the honor to have with us today Daniel Debra, GRFX Baku chapter member, who oversees the community landscape restoration initiatives and dialogues for the chapter. A very warm welcome, Daniel. Thank you for joining us. Daniel, can you share a little bit more with us about your work with the farmers and how your activities are supporting your community to fight and adapt to climate change?
Thank you very much, Hita. I'm very happy to be part of this section, and ELF Boko chapter is doing an amazing work on the ground. We have been engaging farmers on landscape restoration. We have also been engaging farmers on how they can improve their farming system. You know, farmers on this part of our landscape have gotten used to synthetic fertilizers, and it is not helping them currently. They are now confused as to what to do because they keep increasing the number of fertilizers every year. So we've gotten to the farmers, educating them to reduce the use of these synthetic fertilizers and employ agroecology, use more of organic compost preparation to really, regenerate their soil, because currently the soil is not supporting farming activities. Advising them to maintain and grow trees on their land, because trees are of high importance on the landscape. Trees are very, you grow them on their farm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing. Finally, we move to the other part of the world. We come to Latin America. And I now invite to the stage Sergio Lozano, who is the GLF Mountain Restoration Steward. He's making use of knowledge acquired during his PhD in forest resources to restore mountains in Colombia through agroforestry.
Well, I'm Sergio Lozano. I'm very happy to be here with you. So my work in agroforestry is mainly focused in working with local community, having this landscape approach to restore and to diversify the landscapes. Especially here, I'm working with coffee landscapes. It's important to remember that the climate change is affecting the increase of the temperature, and especially for the coffee, this make problems in the production. And we need the trees, we need the shade of the trees to protect the, the crops, the coffee crops. So for this reason, we are taking action and take this agroforestry practice to protect the coffee farmers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Thank you to all of you for all the wonderful work that you're doing. It is really incredible to see how you're working with communities around the world. You're mobilizing people, you're mobilizing communities to adapt to the challenges brought by climate change. And your restoration effects are truly impressive. It is also very interesting to see how closely this is related to restoration, sustainable agriculture. Livelihoods are a part of all of these conversations. But I can imagine that your work hasn't been without challenges. So, for the next part of this session, I would like to hear from all of you about the challenges that you're facing in adapting to and in mitigating to the impacts of climate change. What are the needs that you have to tackle these challenges? But before we come to the panelists, I would like to come to our wonderful audience here. For everyone in the audience, I would like you to join us in this conversation by answering in the chat to our question. The question is, what is your call to action for policymakers?
Where was planting? And for this, we need that technology solution that we are using at this moment. So it's very important to bring this technology to the work. And other bottleneck that I want to highlight is the maintenance activities. Always is important to remember that trees is not only to put the tree, it's going forward, and we need to maintain this activity along at least 2 years, 3 years, to make sure that the tree will bring the benefits to the farmers. And additionally, I want to talk about the lack of economy benefit that we have for the local community. Many projects bring trees, but they don't take the moment to ask to the community which trees they want to plant, why they want to plant, or where they want to plant. So I think that it's very important to say that there is this seed storage and seed production. You can have amazing goals of planting millions of trees, but this will need a lot of efforts to produce all the seedlings to reach the goals.
Thank you so much for sharing those, Sergio. I think these are some very valid points that you've brought up. Really, what they're before you come in with solutions. And then, of course, the different things. A lot of people want to work on tree plantation, but like you rightly said, plantation is only the first step. It is really maintenance, which is going to ensure needs as well. Are they similar to what Sergio has mentioned, or is it different, or what do you think it is?
To restore about 150 hectares of degraded land in the Bamenda ecological zones in the northwest region of Cameroon have been facing a lot of challenges. Most of the challenges stemming from the fact that they are working in a conflict hit zone. And because of this, it is very difficult to convince our government to focus also on environmental needs. They are prioritizing humanitarian needs rather than the environmental needs. Of course, we know that all of them are very vital, but if we ignore our environmental needs today, we might have to regret it later. And because of the crisis as well. We have not been able to convince our government stakeholders to visit our field. We know, of course, that if they visit our field, they might discover the potential in this area, and they'll be able to provide us with technical support and financial support. And again, we are also facing a challenge of transporting our field volunteers to the site, and transporting also our materials like the seedlings and all of that. To leave the basement where we have our nursery to the field is quite a distance, and to get there is not easy. We take 2 hours or more on foot to reach there. So it's actually very challenging. And we surely need financial support. We need financial support in order to be able to encourage our field volunteers, motivate them, and also be able to establish a solar powered nursery maybe around the field, so that transportation can also be reduced.
The environmental crisis continues despite everything else. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for highlighting the different needs, and thank you for continuing to push despite the challenges that you face in the work that you're doing on the field. Let's move to the other part of Africa. Let's come now to Ghana. Daniel, can you share a little bit about the challenges that you are facing? Okay, I think Daniel is frozen. We can come back to him in just a little bit. Let's come to Camille, and then we can come back to Daniel. Camille, over to you.
Thank you, Hita. I really resonate with the rest of the panel. There has been a very strong need of charcoal, especially in our areas, and the use of mangroves, because it has a prolonged heat, as what the communities have been telling us. So most of our sites have this illegal cutting of mangroves, and there has been the lack of other economic livelihood for the communities, which really resort them to find ways to survive. Another challenge that we encounter is that there has been a lack of enforcement on the law, and we were given the restoration site, and there, even if it was already given to us as like conversion, it was what happened was it was reverted back to become a fish pond. So there was no enforcement for the government officials, and it was a lot of push for our end to really share the importance of mangrove conservation and protection. Another challenge is, aside from the human interventions, there were a lot of typhoons that are really erratic at the moment. So we had erratic weather and stronger typhoons, which resort our strategy to plant seedlings not on the later part of the year. So the same with Wirba, our sites are very spread out, and transportation is really needed to the site to really monitor and check on those planted seedlings. And what we really need to accomplish anyway for like our need as a GLFX Mindanao chapter is a strong NGO government support to build alternative forestry to be used for charcoal. We also need to enhance community building, so really a strong trust with communities and government that this is for the good, this is for the environment, and also financing for long-term conservation, so we can employ community members as forest rangers. So it doesn't have to be that we as an NGO will have to go and check them out, check the area and monitor, but we really wanted the community to be part of this and be part of them monitoring their sites as forest rangers. So that's what I can say for this part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camille, for raising some very important points. Challenges in the Philippines, very different from challenges in Africa, very different from those in Latin America, but clearly there are some similarities that we're seeing coming along. So let's come back to Daniel. Daniel, can you share a little bit about your work and any challenges that you're facing?
Thank you, Hita. As we all know, landscape restoration and community engagement is a daunting task. It is not an easy task because communities have their norms and values have shaped the way they think about the environment, the way they relate to the environment. So GLF Boko chapter is really trying to cause a system change to treat the environment differently. challenges that we are facing in relation to what we are doing on the ground. We have the challenge of security protection for the planted seedlings. The community sometimes don't see the need to be involved. They see an organization that has come to their landscape, the duty of the organization to really care for the planted seedlings. So we are currently.
We seem to be losing Daniel. Okay, we will wait for him to maybe rejoin once his internet stabilizes. But thank you so much, Juliet, Virva, Sergio, as well as Camille, for sharing your challenges. We've seen through the work that you're doing, through the different kinds of restoration efforts, we've clearly seen how, despite the landscapes being so different, despite the work being very, very different, there are very common challenges, like, for example, finance, like in terms of transportation, whether it is transportation to the islands of the Philippines or on the land where Juliet is. Also talking about, Sergio talking about how the importance of climate change and restoration, whether it is the warming weathers to have trees that can cool the coffee plantations, really working with the communities on the ground to ensure that their needs are taken into consideration when the work is done, rather than coming and enforcing solutions to them. So let's finally sum up with Daniel. Maybe Daniel, if you want to try switching off your video, it might help with the connection while you speak.
Okay, thank you, Hita. As I said earlier on, there are a lot of enormous challenges with the work we are doing. First, as I said, protection for the planted seedlings. Second, you all know that the Sahel landscape. Okay, thank you very much. It's rather unfortunate the internet is disturbing me a lot, but let me, summarize what I have to say. Communities are willing to protect the trees, but there is also to support them to protect the trees is also another challenge. And we also have a challenge of transporting seedlings to the villages, because where we have our nursery, as said by Juliet, is not closer to the communities. And we also have the intention to, if there's also a support to create boreholes, so that because we have drought issue, the scarcity of, water for farming activities, the communities have only one rainy season within the year for farming, and you all know that our lives depends on them. They produce food for us. Without them, we cannot get food to eat. So we need to give attention to the communities, the kind of food they produce. If it is done on a sustainable manner, we should support them to practice good agroecology practices, so that at the end, the whole world will benefit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing those very valuable points. And we're clearly seeing how, with all the work that you're doing with communities, of course, we've seen the need for capacity building within the local communities, sharing of knowledge, understanding of what the practices are going on outside, but trying to bring them in a much simplified manner, in a way that the local community will benefit and accept it. We've seen how there is a need for restoration for seeds, a need for storage of seeds, transportation, whether it is transportation of people, transportation of goods, transportation of the seeds in itself, infrastructure, which helps all of this, services that can provide for all of this. So really trying to work from the bottom up requires different levels of capacity, finance, training, as well as policy inputs to really ensure that all of this is coming together to make it happen. So the challenges that we've heard just now are very well reflected already in the estimated annual climate change adaptation costs of low-income countries. And according to estimations from the 2020 Adaptation Gap Report by the UN Environment Programme, what we've seen is that $70 billion are required annually, and it is expected to continue to rise to $300 billion by 2030. Since COP15 is in Copenhagen just in a few weeks, high-income countries have committed to mobilizing $100 billion per year for climate action to be given to low-income countries in the global south. Although this agreement was made many years ago, and we've seen that this has been extended to 2025, the combined amount of public and private resources for funding is clearly lacking to reach this target. We have reached only a maximum of $83.3 billion by 2020. And a lot of this has been directed towards mitigation rather than adaptation, which is mainly for the local communities. And it is estimated that around 1/4 of climate finance focuses on adaptation measures, which is quite a small amount when it comes to the larger finance budget, which is reaching a total sum of only $28.6 billion in 2020. So the issue currently at COP27 is clearly on finance. It is being raised by many countries in the global south in the rooms outside of the negotiating rooms in the venue. We're seeing this happening, whether it is finance for adaptation, finance for loss and damage. And clearly, as we've heard from all of you, finance is required on the ground to help all of you, to help restoration champions like you, to support you with the important work that you're doing. So we come to the next question that I have for our panelists. And the next question is, how can policymakers and finance institutions support your work? Can you mention any concrete actions? But once again, before we come to our speakers, I would like to give the floor to answer the question from the GLF Porto Novo chapter in Benin. They've made a special video for us. Let's have a look and then we come back to the speakers.
Bonjour, je suis Coucou Sabitiu Achabi, membre de GLF Insport Novo et de CRADES ONG au Bénin. Nous, jeunes environnementalistes, avions besoin de l'appui des décideurs politiques et des institutions financières pour mieux répondre aux défis de la restauration des paysages et de la protection de la biodiversité qui se présentent au Bénin. Malheureusement, la mangrove se situe parmi les écosystèmes les plus menacés à cause de la population côtière, dont la croissance devient de plus en plus beaucoup, et de la surexploitation de la mangrove. La déforestation et le traitement des déchets anthropiques sont les principaux menaces. L'érosion côtière et la pollution de l'océan Atlantique deviennent inquiétantes. Les effets du changement climatique se font sentir davantage. L'utilisation des pesticides dans l'agriculture et la dégradation des sols sont également très préoccupantes au Bénin. Chers décideurs politiques et institutions financières, il use donc d'agir. C'est pourquoi nous sollicitons votre appui. Face à ces défis, le chapitre GLF Insport Novo a déjà mené plusieurs actions de restauration des paysages et de protection de la nature au cours de cette année 2022. À titre d'exemple, il y a eu des activités de reboisement de plus de 1000 plantes dans les départements de Ouimet du Plateau, des dialogues communautaires, des séances d'éducation environnementale aux élèves, des initiatives d'assainissement de quelques places publiques et salubrité de la plage de l'océan Atlantique, de formation des producteurs pour une agriculture écologique, etc. Tout ceci dans une approche de synergie d'action. Cependant, il reste beaucoup à faire. C'est pourquoi nous, membres de chapitre GLF Insport Novo, sollicitons l'accompagnement des décideurs politiques du Bénin, notamment le Conseil municipal de Porto Novo, le Parlement du Bénin, le ministère de Cadre de vie et du Développement durable, le ministère de l'eau et des mines, le ministère de la Justice et de la Législation et le ministère de l'Agriculture et de la Pêche. Ces décideurs politiques pourront nous aider techniquement, matériellement et financièrement dans la mise en œuvre de nos activités de restauration de la nature. De même, nous exhortons ces décideurs politiques à voter, vulgariser et suivre l'application des lois pertinentes sur la restauration de la nature. Aux partenaires financiers, nous les sollicitons pour le financement de nos projets et initiatives concrètes de restauration de la nature et des paysages au Bénin. Pour le référencement de notre organisation GRADES ou notre chapitre GLF INS et d'autres institutions financières susceptibles de nous appuyer. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, GLF Porto Novo, for sharing your insights and for sharing the wonderful work that you're doing, but the challenges and how policymakers can support you in your work. So coming back to the panel that we have, let's begin with Juliet this time. Juliet, what do you think about what Ms. Kukui just mentioned in her video? And what would you ask policymakers and finance institutions, and how can they support you in your work?
Thank you for the opportunity once again. I think policymakers should use a bottom-to-top approach in framing laws by incorporating knowledge of the local community and the voices of the local actors so that they design and plan and implement laws and reinforce the existing ones. I also suggest that policymakers should embrace the leadership of local actors and communities in climate action by ensuring that local actors are meaningfully participating and are part of decision-making tables. And they should also help to strengthen the capacity of community-based organizations so as to increase the quality of their partnerships with the leading organizations around the world. And one last thing I want to suggest is that finance institutions should ensure tracking and reporting of finances for transparency, accountability, and resource mobilization. This will ensure that the finances reaches and meets the needs of those at the forefront and who are often underrepresented among recipients as far as funding is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet, for really bringing up some very valid and concrete points to action. Let's move on this time to Danielle. If you're still here with us, Danielle, maybe you want to try. What would your suggestions and what would your ask be from financial institutions and policymakers?
Thank you, Heather. What I can say is policymakers should incentivize farmers. There should be a policy that will incentivize farmers to practice agroecology. Because if you want farmers to really change their old way of farming, which is not sustainable, there should be some form of incentives, and the policy should be attractive enough to really get more farmers to really use agroecology practices. Again, I would say financial institutions should build the capacity of farmers, because farmers don't know anything. They are farming for the communities, for the world, but they lack knowledge on certain way of farming. So there should be a training as and when it's needed, frequent training for farmers, frequent engagement as to how they should go about their farming systems. And also, because if there is frequent engagement, you will really know what they need. Sometimes what the farmers need, they cannot know. But when you get closer to them, you will really know that, oh, wow, this is what they need, but not this. Because my engagement with farmers, they were saying they need fertilizer, but further engagement with them really, occurred to me that no, this is not fertilizer. It is good practices, good farming practices with other incentives, not fertilizer, other farming inputs. So financial institutions should really get closer to farmers, and they should also get closer to organizations on the ground that work with farmers directly, because they know the cry, they know the issues of the poor farmers. The farmers don't have money. They spend a lot of money buying seed inputs, buying other inputs for farming practices, and they end up with their commodities or their food crops purchased at a lower cost. That is not good, because they are told they should gain from their toll. I'll talk about the value chain. The middlemen or women, we call it in Ghana, are benefiting from farming activities. Such bottlenecks should be eliminated. If this bottleneck is not eliminated, farmers will always continue to suffer, and those are the middle people who also benefit at the expense of those doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for raising some very, very concrete and very actionable points as well. Thank you. Sergio, do you want to reflect on what Daniel has just mentioned and maybe share from your perspective what you think needs to be done?
For sure. I totally agree with Daniel. It's so amazing that in different places we merge in the same point. So here in Colombia is the same, also in Latin America. So when we talk about financial institution, I think that one of the most important things is to talk the same language. So here, for example, we need to put in the table sustainable model business, think that the restoration and the agroforestry is good for the biodiversity, is good for the ecosystem, but also for the economic of the farmers and the local community, that will create benefits, economical benefits, not only in short term, but also in a long term. It's important also to have this planification of the model business that we are proposing. So here is very important to have a short-term investment, a middle and long-term investment. And when I told long-term, I mean more than 30 years. So the reality is that we have at this moment financial institution with a huge amount of money, but they only will invest when they will be sure that they are investing in something that is sustainable and that is creating benefit not only for the local community but also for this financial institution. So as Daniel said, we need to do the restoration and the agroecology attractive, yes, not only for the farmers but also for the financial institution. And finally, I would like to say that most of the project always is talking about numbers of trees. You can see that projects want to plant 2 million of trees for the next year, but I think that the most important here is not only to finance numbers of trees, but also we have an other bunch of ecosystem service that can be financed. For example, the water and the soil is some elements of the ecosystem that I will call the financial institution to see this more than the number of trees. So
Thank you so much, Sergio. Some very, very important points and that you've been highlighting to really reflect on what policymakers as well as financial institutions can be doing. And finally, we come to Camille. Camille, the floor is yours. Do you find any synergies from what any of the previous speakers have mentioned? And what are your thoughts on the same?
Yeah, I agree with Sergio, what he said about that. A lot of restoration projects are all about the number of trees, and I think it's the same in the Philippines. What I do hope is that the policymaker should find innovative ways for better monitoring program. So not just planting in numbers, because there are many civil society organizations who have pushed for numbers just because of that, forced by funding institutions, and there has been lack of conservation of mature trees instead, and the transparency of monitoring. So policymakers should give more importance to the conservation of these mature trees, reduce illegal cutting of mangroves, and employing monitoring of these planted ones as well. And in the Philippines, I've also noticed that there has to be more re-evaluation of the laws and the ordinances that we have, because as climate has been changing, the ordinances way years ago is not anymore applicable to what is happening now. And there has to have an improvement of those ordinances so that we can improve of our old ways. And furthermore, for the financial institutions, my take on this is that everyone should know the process of proper restoration. It could be mangroves, forestry, agroecology, to avoid pushing organizations or grassroots organizations to plant in the wrong areas and the wrong time. And there has to be that honest communication between funder and restoration practitioners about the process. And there has to be a clear understanding of both parties that what needs to be achieved at the end of the day. And this has been already a topic last year in COP26, but I think the most important is to have the finance go down to grassroots organizations who are doing more groundwork. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for raising some very, very important points with us today. And I'll come back to all of you for one final question, which is, what is the ask that you have from everyone who's listening to you today? But before we come to that, let's take a look at what the answers that we've gotten from our audience so far. We asked our audience to share their thoughts on their call to action from policymakers and finance institutions at COP27 that have been gathered here. There are a few answers that we've got. There's someone who says we need to ask for commitment to climate justice and move towards degrowth in development, especially institutions and governments from the global north. I think a very valid point. A conversation around degrowth is only just about starting, and I think not yet in the negotiation rooms. But we're clearly seeing this conversation more and more as more people come together at COP27. So thank you for raising that point. There's another person who mentions we need purposeful financing and policy placement to enhance the speedy recovery of our environment. And I think that ties in very clearly have mentioned, really trying to ensure that the finance that is in goes to the local communities, goes to people like you who are actually doing the work on the ground to ensure that there is meaningful action. We need decisive action for environmental and cultural future and also for our global financial future, which is very true. Environment, cultures, finance, all of this cannot be put in silos. We have to work together to see. When we work with communities, we definitely talk about cultures, we talk about food systems, we talk about lifestyles. So a lot of this has to be center of the conversations that we're having. And finally, I think we have one final answer which says policymakers and financial institutions need to directly fund grassroots community-based organizations actively involved in restoring landscapes. So this, I think, very nicely summarizes all the work that you have been doing. It also mentions your asks and your challenges that you've been facing on the ground. So let's sum it up with one final question. And I noticed that Juliet might have to leave earlier. So we start with Juliet. What is the one ask that you have from everyone in the room who's listening to you today? How can they support you?
To everyone listening to me right away, I want to invite us all to go into action now. It is not time for us to start making promises. It is time for us to get into action, because if we don't get into action now, we might have to regret it very soon. If you cannot plant a tree, don't be part of cutting it down. If you cannot plant a tree, you may also be as well someone at a position where you can influence or trigger financial support to support projects of tree planting. And I also want to encourage the restoration initiatives that we should move from planting and counting the number of trees we have planted to actually making sure that these trees we have planted are growing and are surviving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. Let's come to Camille.
Thank you, Hita. What I want to say to everyone who's joining and making decisions is that, reforestation in whichever landscape that we have is now becoming a trend everywhere. But really, let's push for reforestation with a very, very strong impact to local communities for their own resilience, and push to protect local biodiversity, and really finding why are we doing this? What is missing in the area that we can fulfill? So in every reforestation work is we have to ask, why are we doing this? So we really need to include all other aspects to reduce the climate change is happening today, and make sure we're below the 1.5 degrees Celsius, and focus on action and enforcement in every whichever country that we are in.
Thank you so much, Camille, for sharing your thoughts. Let's come to Daniel.
Thank you once again, Lita. My last word for us is for us to be able to ensure sustainable or regenerative agriculture. All hands on deck: governmental institutions, policymakers, community members, chiefs, opinion leaders, those that control power, investors, any other body that matters, because it is not the duty of just a particular person to ensure that there's better production of food, there's better nutrition, there's better environment and better life. For us to ensure all these four betters of food production, everybody should be on board. And again, I also say that for us also to also ensure for landscape restoration framework, there should be a lot of inputs from experts and scientists as to how we go about the growing of trees, because most often than not, we grow the right trees at the wrong places with the wrong management practices. And when this is done, the consequence is very disastrous. So there should be a lot of education, there should be a lot of training, and a lot of empowerment for those on the ground doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing those very powerful words. And finally, we come to Sergio to close us out for today.
Yes, thank you. I would like to point that we need the ecological restoration and agroecology actions is the truth. But to scale up this action, to going from local to national and to regional level, we require long-term financiation support. And so I call to all the financial institutions to think in the long term of the projects, more than 30 years. And finally, we need to understand that planting a tree is just the beginning of a process that take many years.
Thank you so much, Sergio. And thank you once again to all four of you, Daniel, Juliet, Sergio, as well as Camille, for joining us today and having this conversation with us. It's been a learning experience, specifically also for myself, and the wonderful work that you're doing on the. So thank you for having us. Thank you for being with us today with us at the Robert Bosch Stiftung to round out this session on the panel contributions. Perspective of Philanthropy, Ms. Ottilia Bowles, over to you. Thank you for being a partner for this session, and a very warm been watching us today. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Hita, for guiding us through this session. And a big thank you to Camille, Daniel, Sergio, and Juliet for sharing your insights and rich experiences on advancing restoration from your engagement with your respective GLFX chapters, and for formulating your demands towards policymakers and donors gathered not far from here in the negotiation spaces of COP27. It's truly impressive and fascinating listening to you. And I think we have all listened very carefully to your thoughts and also to your asks. This year's climate conference has been coined the implementation COP because it is high time that the goals we have set within the UNFCCC framework and the Paris Agreement, within the nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans, are turned into action. Climate change is already a reality, especially for communities in the Global South. To increase climate resilience, especially of the most vulnerable communities, we need to responsibly manage our land, nature, and resources, ensure access to healthy and sustainably produced food for everyone, and transform our economies to benefit people and nature. It is initiatives and projects like yours that lead the way in these efforts and that make climate action happen on the ground. By restoring degraded landscapes, by promoting a sustainable way of farming and food production, and by improving the livelihoods of communities. You are the actual champions of implementation who are on the path to realizing the necessary transformation as we speak. But as we have heard today, you're also facing many challenges. A lack of access to capacity building, extension services, seeds, markets, and an overall lack of sufficient political, financial, and technical support often obstructs locally led adaptation efforts like yours. The call thus goes out to decision makers and financial institutions to support efforts like yours for climate resilience. The international community must invest in locally anchored solutions and meaningfully include local communities, farmers, indigenous groups, women, and young people in key discussions and negotiations. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but because we won't win the fight against the climate crisis and achieve a sustainable transformation towards a climate resilient future without local action. It's a privilege to be next to you on the digital stage, to hear you speak of your invaluable work and your distinct demands towards the governments, businesses, international organizations, and funds that are gathered here for COP27. Knowing that your investment of energy and time into making your voice heard here comes on top of your incredible efforts for advancing transformation on the ground. We think this is where philanthropy, including ourselves as Robert Bosch Stiftung, can and should support by providing the space, mental, financial, and otherwise, for local initiatives and change makers to get together, to exchange, find common positions, and express their voice in spaces like COP27 that sadly are not yet naturally responsive to the demands of those who matter most. We at the Robert Bosch Foundation are honored to support the GLFX chapters on their journey and would sincerely like to thank you for sharing your experience and insights in this session today. Thank you all very much.
You are welcome.
Thank you so much, Otele, for your wonderful words, for your support, and for everything that you're doing to support young people, but also grassroots communities in their work in restoration and conservation. Thank you once again to all our wonderful panelists for being with us. And finally, the biggest thank you to our wonderful audience for tuning in, for listening.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks, everyone.